Well, good evening. Welcome to Manuscript Monday. It is Tuesday, so this is our only Manuscript Monday on a Tuesday, pretty much because the 4th of July was yesterday, and almost everybody in the United States was had off, and we're celebrating the birth of a nation, as they say. Today, our special guest is Melissa Wynn, and we're going to fire it up in about 30 seconds. Thanks for tuning in. We got a nice crowd tonight from all over the world, from a variety of places and a variety of organizations, from collectors and aficionados of Civil War history and all those kind of things. My name is Brian Cathanis. I'll be your host, but I'll be turning it over to Melissa in just a little bit. You can see her on your screen, and she'll be right there. So just give us 30 seconds. We'll get right to 8 o'clock, and we'll get things going. Good deal. Well, we're going to get going. We're going to fill you with all kinds of information and great stories and wonderful images for the next hour. Our special guest tonight is Melissa Wynn. She's a director of photography for Civil War Times and America's Civil War magazines. Her program is Interrupted Sentiments, Dead Letter Office Images. I'm your host, Brian Cathanis. I'm with the Manuscript Society, and I'm also the managing partner of National Appraisal Consultants in Hope, New Jersey. And with that, let's tell you what's going on here. So who's sponsoring the webinar? The webinar is sponsored by the Manuscript Society, a not-for-profit organization that's been in existence for many years. Our goal at the Manuscript Society and part of our mission is to educate the public, help collectors preserve and protect historical manuscripts and figure out how they all fit into a history. Why a webinar? Well, it's a great way to reach a lot of people quickly and efficiently, and we're trying to expand our reach to new members and to those interested in history and interested in manuscripts. Why now? Well, why not? Heck, it's July. It's kind of Gettysburg is on most people's minds around now, but we have these every Monday, except today, it's Tuesday, because yesterday was the 4th of July. We've invited people from the Manuscript Society, from most of the appraisal groups, the personal property appraisal groups across the country. We've invited folks from the Society of American Archivists. We've invited collector societies from across the country and around the world, and we have a good number of folks that have tuned in tonight. We'll open up for questions in just a little bit. I'll tell you what we're going to cover in just a moment, and I'm going to tell you how to get more information, how to on this program, on what Melissa does and how she does it, and if you want to reach out to her, how you'll be able to contact her. And with that, let's get it going. I'm gonna let you read this because I hate when someone does a PowerPoint presentation and they read you the slide. So I'll give you a minute to give you a rough idea what we're going to cover. Obviously, we're going to go much deeper than that, but take a moment to scan through this. So Melissa has a lot to cover in a short period of time, but I'm sure she's going to do just a fine job. We're going to go 1 hour total, including some questions. We'll open it up to questions at the end. We'll unmute you and you can ask Melissa questions, or you can type them in to the little chat box. If you have a question, there are ways to raise your hand in your little control panel there. You'll see a little hand. You can raise and lower your hand. If you have a question, you can type it into the question section on your little control panel there. And you can also put it into the chat area too. And again, at the end, if you have questions, raise your hand. I'll unmute you and you'll be able to ask Melissa directly. And with that, let's tell you a little about what Melissa is up to these days and what she does. So Melissa, she's a director of photography at HistoryNet. She's a photographer, a writer, an editor, and is a collector of Civil War photographs. She has a great, strong background in this. She's forgotten more about Civil War images than most people in the world will ever know. She's a member of the Professional Photographers Association, the Authors Guild, and the Center for Civil War Photography. And she's also an avid runner and a triathlete, and she is running avidly around the country, taking her kids all over the country to see the things that they're interested in. Some may be more modern history than what we're talking about today. So with that, let me tell you what's going to happen, and I'll turn it over to Melissa in just a moment. I'm going to go back. There we go. Melissa, I'm going to change me and make you the presenter, and then you can do that. Your mic should be on. Are you there?
I am, yes.
Good, great. Okay, so I'm going to, you should be able to go to your screen now there, and you should be able to bring up your PowerPoint presentation. As I think
Okay.
I'm going to take my change presenter. Let's do. There you go.
Okay, so you can see my screen?
I can see your screen. If you hit play from start, then it'll open up. We're seeing the screen that you see now. Yep. And I'm going to turn my camera off, so it is all yours, folks. Melissa, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Brian very much and the Manuscript Society for having me on to talk to you about dead letter office images. I really appreciate the opportunity to do it. Again, I do work for HistoryNet, which is a publisher of 9 magazines that are all related to history. I particularly work on the Civil War Times and America's Civil War magazines. Going to tell you a little bit today, as you saw in the introduction, about these images that are referred to as dead letter office images. And really what they did, they are photographs that were sent in the mail and ended up at the dead letter office. So I'll tell you a little bit about what the dead letter office is and why they ended up there and where they are today. So a little bit of background leading up to that. During the Civil War, you've got hundreds of thousands of men that have left home. Many are leaving home for the first time. They have never been out of their town before, and they are going off to war, the front lines, and they're really not accustomed to being away from home as much, and they write letters home. Education was sometimes sketchy, and some of them were uneducated, or they just really didn't have experience with writing letters or addressing letters. Some of them did not read and write, and more importantly, they weren't really accustomed to the postage requirements. So all of these things combined really sort of inundate the dead letter office, which is an office that was established in 1825 in Washington, D.C., and the dead letter office exists within the post office at this time, and they are tasked with delivering undeliverable mail. So many of these soldiers' letters end up at this dead letter office. The dead letter office is kind of a unique piece of history in itself, and it is staffed with clerks. The clerks are uniquely granted the authority by Congress to open the mail, and they're able to open the mail with the full intention of trying to decipher who the recipient of that letter is supposed to be. So many times they will use, the clerks will be very knowledgeable about geography. They have to understand the colloquial use of language to sort of sleuth out where these letters are supposed to go. Because they are being entrusted with the public's mail, they are oftentimes, as this depiction of them shows, retired clergymen. and they are, in the later 19th century, a lot of them are women as well. They're kind of considered to have sort of a higher moral standard, to be trusted with not just the letters, but the contents of the letters. Oftentimes there's monetary value attached to some of the items within the letters, and including photographs and other items as well. The clerks are also tasked with sort of disposing of items that are come within the mail as well. And during the before the war, there's just really sort of hundreds of letters that end up at this office. But during the Civil War, you can imagine now, with hundreds of thousands of men off to war, they are sort of inundated with mail that's undeliverable. I want to talk a little bit about a couple of postage requirements, and really a couple of things that happened during the war time that sort of, you know, brings the massive amount of mail to the dead letter office to a sort of a, you know, not controllable amount. So in 1861, of course, there's the secession of the states requires the federal offices and post offices in those states are no longer in use. So the mail that usually would go through those post offices is stuck or undeliverable as well. Again, you have these soldiers who don't really have experience addressing envelopes, so they have their mail is indecipherable. That ends up at the dead letter office. More importantly, in 1856, there's a law that's passed. Prior to 1856, mail is delivered and it can be addressed without postage, and it can be mailed without postage. And in 1856, a law is passed that does actually require the prepayment of postage with a postage stamp. And then it would be held for postage, and there's if it didn't have the postage, it would be held for postage at a local post office, and the addressee could be notified that they have mail available for them. They could come and they could pay for the postage itself. In 1861, on May 1st, 1861, a new post office regulation further eliminates that notification to addressees. So now every item of mail that has not got postage attached to it is delivered to the dead letter office. And the influx of these unpaid letters to the dead letter office is really stifling, especially because you have all of these hundreds of thousands of men writing letters that were not a typical, you know, population that was passing letters back and forth through the mail. In 1861, Postmaster General Montgomery Blair actually writes in his annual report, quote, "By immediately sending this class of letters to the dead letter office, it was expected that a proper compliance with the law would be enforced. But so far from this being the case, the number after 1 year's trial exceeds 10,000 each month, and the attention they require imposes considerable additional labor and expense on this department." So they have mass amounts of mail coming in. By 1862, the third assistant postmaster at the time, Alexander Zevely, he seeks a solution to sort of curtail this problem. And he creates what you see in the upper right-hand corner here, a soldier letter stamp. In camp, there could be officers that would write this. If they didn't have this soldier letter stamp, they could circle it and write it on an envelope. And if they did have the stamp, they could stamp it with soldier letter. And this would immediately move soldier letters through the mail so that they could be delivered to a destination that then, if they didn't have postage, you can see on this one, 3 cents was due, that it would be collected at the point of delivery. So that does move through quite a few of these soldier letters without postage, but you still have thousands of letters that are going through that are indecipherable. And many of these letters home include soldier photographs. At the time of the Civil War, photography is still pretty much in its infancy. It's only been in the States for about 10 years. And the price of photography prior to the Civil War was pretty expensive, and it really is a perfect storm here that photography right around this time becomes less expensive as well. The image you see on the right is called a tintype, and the one on the left is carte de visite. The tintype process is similar to what people had been using before the war, in which an image was on a glass plate. This is now, it's not really actually tin, it's iron on an iron plate, but it's a much cheaper, less expensive material, and therefore photography becomes within reach to more of the common citizen. And soldiers are eager to get their photographs taken. The carte de visite follows very quickly and becomes a popular convention at the same time as that, really a little bit past that. And Civil War soldiers will definitely take advantage of this, and the carte de visite will just take off during the Civil War. It's carte de visite is sort of the word for calling card, and that's really the way they use these. These are actually the size of about a playing card, and it's the first time that the photography is paper printed and it's put onto a card stock. And the carte de visite was actually the first time a negative was used, and therefore these photographs could be reproduced easily and cheaply. And soldiers were very eager to have their photographs taken, send their letters home with a photograph, and exchange the photographs with their comrades in camp as well. They're sort of like a school photograph, you know, when you were in school and you'd get your picture taken and you'd exchange it with your friends, but they certainly would send them home. And many of these letters at the dead letter office include these photographs. And again, the dead letter office clerks are able to go through and see these images in the photographs as well, in the letters. And some estimates put it at 5,000. I've actually seen some that are closer to 8 or 10, but it's really probably closer to 5,000 of these photographs still existed at the dead letter office at the end of the conflict. When the war's over, the dead letter office still has like close to 5,000, if not more, of these photographs in their possession. What happens next is really a great story of patriotism, I think. And the third Postmaster General, again, Alexander Zevely, is really convicted to get these images back home to their intended recipients. So he conjures up a sort of innovative idea to post them in what was known as the Dead Letter Post Office Museum. So the Dead Letter Office Museum existed also within the post office building downtown in DC, and it held artifacts and documents that related to the post office history, but it also had a sort of exotic attraction to it, with including different artifacts that ended up at the dead letter office in these undeliverable pieces of mail. I've seen different accounts that included a couple of loaded pistols and even a skull. So these things were on display at the Dead Letter Office Museum in DC, and people did come to see this as an attraction and a place to visit. So Zevely believes that if he can hang these photographs up on the wall, he can get the public's help in identifying these images and help returning them to their intended recipients. So what he does is order them to be displayed on these boards. He has them attached to the panels with brass clips. You can see each one on the top and the bottom has a brass clip, and they're in groups of 36 images, 4 rows of 9 images each. They are identified here. I'm going to show you a little close up here. Again, this on the top is you can see the brass clips that attach them to the panels. Each one of them on the bottom left has a red ink numeral, which could be used as an identifier. If you came into the museum, you would see the panel and you could identify a face and say, you know, I know numeral 451. That's my uncle John Smith. He was a private in Indiana. And then you could take that, they would take the image off the board. They would write on the board the person who was claiming the image, and they would write on the board the name of the person who was identified and where they're from. There's actually thousands of success stories. Some people say up to 2,000 of these were actually claimed off the walls of the Dead Letter Post Office Museum. And they stay up there for years. They're on the walls for years, and people keep coming in. They are constantly looking for ways to enlist the public's help in returning these images home. A couple of the success stories actually in June 1874, according to one of these panels that still exists today, somebody named Mr. F. Poplane claimed the photo of Lieutenant S. Roderick of the 19th Iowa Infantry. And on October 16th, 1902, so you can see these things hung up for years and were available for the public's, you know, consumption basically for years, decades after the war, trying to return these images. On October 16th of 1902, Edward Marsh of the 10th New York Battery claimed his own photo. It was 40 years after he had placed it in the mail. He came in and claimed it off the wall. So there's about 2,000 of these success stories. I've seen some of these panels that are almost empty. They have, you know, the writing all over them of people that have claimed the images off of them. And then there's lots of these panels just like this that have the entire panel is still full. There are still many of them that were not claimed. The Dead Letter Office also tried to enlist the public's help outside of Washington, D.C. by listing the photographs in newspapers and journals of the Grand Army of the Republic. And in the early 1890s, the photographs and panels were cleaned and bound and put into an album. That album was also held at the Post Office Museum for a while. People could come in and look through that. The GAR was especially interested in helping. The GAR, of course, is the Union Army's sort of veteran group. They were really interested in also trying to help return these images to their intended recipients. And you can see why, and you can imagine what it was like to go into the Post Office Museum, stare at a wall of these panels of these men that had been in the war, many of them very young faces, and they're all sort of staring back at you, you know, their fathers, brothers, you know, their lovers, their men who went to the war, and their stories are not yet finished. They have not, their photographs have not returned back to their intended recipient. So there's a large, you know, contingent of people trying to return these photographs home. The GAR Mead Post in Philadelphia actually inspects all of the photographs and removes many of them that have inscriptions on them, and they turn them over to the GAR headquarters in Washington, D.C. to help try to identify and deliver them to their owners as well. So lots of different players trying to get these images back home. I spoke with a woman, a curator at the Postal Museum that's downtown right now. Her name is Lynn Heidelbaugh and when we were talking about this, we were really both discussing these extraordinary efforts, which, you know, to return the images home. She said they were above and beyond the standard operating procedure. And she told me, I think it shows how deep the scars of the war were for the United States, and that people were dealing with the aftermath very personally and in a very tangible way. This is still a country mending itself after a conflict within itself that's, you know, unmatched. The album, now that they're bound in this album, so the album, they actually start to tour the album as well. Here are some pictures of a state fair in, well, a fair, World's Fair in Chicago. These the album would travel around, and it had this real interesting stand that it would sit in. And there were several of the albums. They would sit in this stand, and people could thumb through them at these different world fairs as well. Again, it was just an effort to try to get more people to see these photographs, come in, identify them, and bring them back to their rightful owner. There's actually some success stories from this as well, which I think is really neat. Some newspaper articles that I read at the 1898 Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska, the daughter of Civil War veteran J.J. Gorman claimed her father's photograph, which had been sent during the war from Indianapolis to South Bend while he was serving with the 86th Indiana Infantry. And that photograph had been in the Dead Letter Office exhibit for 35 years. So that you've got decades have gone by and people are still claiming these images. The newspaper at the time reported about the event, about the exhibit of these photographs, and said, and the article actually writes, there's a melancholy collection from the Dead Letter Office, including 2 cases of photographs of soldiers which were sent and miscarried during the Civil War. Looking at them, I thought, how young were most of the faces? So again, really just efforts across the country to return these images home. In 1911, the Dead Letter Office Museum actually closes, mostly due to space constraints downtown. And the album of soldier photographs sort of lingers in the Dead Letter Office after that. Of course, you've got decades now are going by, and fewer and fewer people are paying attention to, trying to return these images in the public's eye, at least. It stays at the Dead Letter Office, still available for people to come in and look at it, however. But by 1930s, it's placed into storage, sort of in a back room, but it remains there. And in the 1940s, when the countries embroiled in World War II, the government sort of decides to free up some of that storage space and divides the album and sells it. They sell the collection of these panels. They sell the panels in full, really. Many of them go to a bookseller in New York, but few of them are sold off elsewhere. After they end up at this bookseller in New York, some collectors will come and purchase some of them. There's actually 2 collectors, large collectors, that purchased bulks of these. One of them's name was Philip Medicus. He purchased several of the panels, dozen of them actually, and he sold 10 of them, about 360 photos, to the George Eastman Museum in New York. This is an example of that. This is one of 10 panels that the museum still has in its collection. And again, you can see the photographs. This panel is completely full of photographs that were never claimed. They have the brass clips and the red numerals on the bottom left. You can see on the bottom right hand here, actually one of them got a little faded and they put the red numeral in the top right hand. Another collector that purchased several thousand of these images from that New York bookseller, his name is Argus Ogborn, and he's sort of synonymous with Dead Letter Office photographs to collectors now. He purchased these a couple thousand of these images at the time from the New York bookseller. And in 1982, he sold off about 1,400 of them. They are actually now, they were purchased by several collectors, and some of these are floating around in collections still today. He's very synonymous with these images because he was really well known for being a cataloger of his collections. He had an ancestor that served in the Civil War, so he was very interested in collecting Civil War photographs, memorabilia, artifacts of all sorts, and highly organized when he did so. So he would write his name on the back of his photographs, most of them, and he would always write this catalog number 409. So there's literally a subsection of collecting dead letter office photographs that are collecting Argus Ogborn photographs, because he's very synonymous with these photographs as well. And again, he sold about 1,400 of them off. A couple of them were panels. One of the collectors that purchased some of those panels, his name was Dave Taylor. I spoke with him a little bit when I was writing a story about these photographs for the magazine, and he said he also had sort of a touching fondness for the photographs. He still owns several of them, and actually he just sold off a few of his panels. They're highly sought after now, these images. He said they were lost in the mails of the 1860s and never found their rightful owners. With any luck, today's owners will appreciate them as individual pieces of Civil War history that have finally come to rest in their proper place. So these photographs are now circulating a lot in collectors. You can go to shows and find them. And the neat thing about them is they're very identifiable because they all have these markings on them. Of course, the red numeral on the bottom left, and on the top and the bottom, you can see the traces of these brass clips that held them to the panels within the dead letter office, post office museum. So again, thousands of them are still floating out there. They probably go for a couple $100 each. Of course, many of them have not been identified, so they're mostly unidentified photographs, but you can use clues on the photographs. This example here is one that's in my collection, and if you're a Civil War photograph collector, there are lots of clues within photographs to sort of date them or place them. This one in particular has a specific backdrop that Civil War collectors know well, as it's called the Benton Barracks backdrop. It was one of several backdrops that were at the Benton Barracks, and there's lots of soldiers that are photographed in front of it. So it's a real sleuthing sort of mystery to look at these photographs and try to figure out just even a sliver of information from them. A lot of times you can see a photograph, a back mark on the back of them as well, and that can help identify a photographer or possibly a place of residence for some of these soldiers, because they would get their pictures taken in their hometown when they were on leave or something like that. So I want to tell you a little bit about a success story that we actually had when we ran the story in Civil War Times on the dead letter office images. I was really fortunate to be able to get some high resolution copies of these panels from the George Eastman Museum. They sent over to me 10 copies of each one of the 10 panels. And this is, again, another example of one of the panels. And you can see, again, that they are clipped on the top and the bottom with these brass clips, and the lower left has the red numerals. We were only able to run one or two of the panels in the magazine itself because it's print copies. But when we ran the story online, we were able to include a couple more of the panels that weren't necessarily included in the print publication. So I received an email from a woman at the Ross County Historical Society after this copy of one of the George Eastman panels ran online. And she said, hey, that guy up in the upper left-hand corner, we know him. That's number 1193. His name is Abisha Downing. So she sent me a bunch of information about Abisha Downing, and he was from Ross County, or he was from Ohio. He enlisted in the 1st Ohio at the beginning of the war. On April 29, 1861, he enlisted in the 1st Ohio Infantry, and he enlists for 3 months. He serves in a 3-month regiment. He will go off to the First Battle of Manassas, and he'll fight there. He'll fight in Vienna, and then he'll return back home. After he returns home, he re-enlists in the 73rd Ohio Infantry on November 4th of 1861 in Company D. So he will go back off to war again, and he survives. He endures the rest of the war. And then he'll return home. He becomes a very active member of his GAR in town, the Veterans Organization, and he becomes sort of a little bit of a celebrity. He goes back to the First Manassas 50th anniversary celebrations, and the Ross County Historical Society has, as you can see, this very image that's on the dead letter office panel. And then also they've got several other images of him, a couple of images of him from when he's older, and they have many accounts of him recounting his time in the war for the 50th anniversary. Because he was sort of a celebrity, local celebrity at that time, and interviewed quite a bit. So you can imagine it was really interesting and fun to have this sort of success story. After reading all this stuff about the Dead Letter Office Museum and the panels and these images and how really, trying to get them home to, their intended recipients, how fun and neat it was to have somebody call and say, identify one for us as well. It was really fascinating. I'm going to show you a couple of my images here. Again, you can see these are all dead letter office images that are floating around in collections. Again, I go to different shows, or there are some Facebook sites where people sell images, and also online auction houses as well, where people sell images, collect images. Most of mine are cartes de visite. I have one tintype that's got a dead letter office attached to it. And again, you can see on the bottom left, they have the red numbers, and on the top and the bottom, they have the brass clip markings. Again, I think I told you some of the panels recently went up for sale. The images are becoming a little more popular, and the panels have been recently up for sale. One of them I think sold for $10,000, and another one I think for $8,000. They have their own life and their own story, of course. When I was working on the story for Civil War Times and going through talking to some collectors, I talked with one collector. His name was Ron Palm. He said, they're very touching. The letter that never made it, the story that never got told. And that's always kind of what's endeared me to these images as well, is if you really look at the faces of these images, this is the face of the war. These are the men that went off and fought it, and they end up on this wall in the office museum downtown in DC. They just have this sort of mystery attached to them, and that's kind of why I call them interrupted sentiments, because they were interrupted. You look at their faces and you just kind of wonder, did they make it? Did they survive the war? Are they somebody's brother, somebody's sister? I mean, somebody's brother, somebody's lover? Do they have a sister back home that they sent this to? What's their story? And will they ever be identified? There are some efforts right now, of course, in the Civil War photography arena to help identify more images. Kurt Luther at Virginia Tech is a professor there who's been working for a few years now, on what's called a Civil War photo sleuth, and that's an online facial recognition program, which he's been using to help identify photographs like dead letter office images. He was actually my first introduction to dead letter office images. I saw him speak at a conference, and he had sort of the same endearing aspect of these photographs as well. There's sort of a mystery attached to them, and a sort of detective work attached to them as well. So that's why I've always been drawn to them, and like to share the story with other people as well. So this is another panel you can see as well. And I would like to take some questions if there are any. So.
That's great. Good. Melissa, let me switch back over if I may. And I'm
Okay.
going to take over this screen again. Show my screen too. Let's bring this up and we'll get that going there. There we go. Good. Melissa, that was really incredible. Thanks so much. We do have lots of questions. I just wanted to do a couple of things quickly before we move on to your questions so people don't forget. There's going to be a certificate of attendance that will be coming to you as soon as this is over, within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You're going to receive an email that says, thanks for being part of this. That's also going to have a link to the Manuscript Society website where you can watch this again and again and again and again and again. It'll take me about 2 weeks to get it up. So understand it'll just take me a little while. I want to explain that to you. You're not going to see it right away. But there will be an attachment where you click on it and you can download a certificate of attendance. A lot of people want that for continuing education credits or to hang on their wall or do whatever they want. We don't send them out to anybody else. If you want to send them to your appraisal organization or your archivist society or any other place that's looking for your continuing education credits or time, you'll have to do that too. But seriously, give this a long time to download. That little wheel is going to go around and around. Go make a pot of coffee, go have a drink, go take the dog for a walk. It'll take a while. It could take several minutes. So let it go. If you have some problems, you have my contact information on that email as well, but give it some time to download. Don't erase that email. If you can't get it to open up, just forward that email to me. I'll make sure I get it open and send it back to you, but it should be okay. You can watch the webinar anytime. I mentioned we're going to post it on the Manuscript Society website. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and all of the other things that we've done in the past are also available to you, or our Manuscript Monday webinars too. And I want to thank you for being part of it. I want to certainly thank Melissa. We're going to open it up to questions in a moment. Thanks to the trustees and staff of the Manuscript Society, and for you for joining us and being part of that program. Here's what's coming up on August 1st. It's our Manuscript Society virtual beach party. We're going to open it up in August because it's summer. People can share their favorite item. We're going to let you open up your cameras and your mics. You can ask questions about collecting. You want to share a collecting story. You want to know what's new in the auction market or in the dealer market. Are you looking for a specific item? You can share that with everybody, or just hang out and have a virtual cocktail with us. That's on the first Monday, Manuscript Monday, on August 1st. And with that, let's get to questions. If you're not a member of the Manuscript Society, you can become one by going to manuscript.org. You'll find a lot of information there as well. So let's go one more here, and then I will get to some questions. If you put your hand up, I will look for you, and then I will open your mic, and then you can ask your question. And I'm going to start first off with Jessica had a question. Jessica, I'm going to unmute you, okay? And you may have to unmute yourself, and you can ask Melissa your question directly. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, you bet. Thanks. That's a great question. Fire away.
Perfect. Okay, so I might have missed this at the beginning, Melissa, but I was wondering if we knew why the photographs were removed and separated from the letters, or were they just never part of a letter unit? And I'm saying this, I'm an archivist and I have about 100 photos that are not Civil War photos, but were also removed from their letters. And I just want to know if anyone knows why.
Sure. So in all of the stuff that I read, originally the letters were actually included, and they were also housed at the dead letter office. And if you came in and claimed one of these photographs, you would also get the letter that went with it. I think probably just over the course of what became, as you can see, sort of decades, the photographs become separated from the letters and they're not housed with them. I think especially once they come off the walls of the museum and they're bound back into these albums, they become sort of a separate, piece of property at the dead letter office. And again, they have storage constrictions, so they become separated from the letters at some point, and they're I've never seen a photograph at this point that's attached with a letter.
Great. Does that help, Jessica?
Yeah, that helps. I was just so curious because I know.
Tell me about, are you working with a particular era or particular time, Jessica, with the archive that you're working with?
I'm a university archivist, so I work for a university up in, well, I'm in Toronto, but I'm originally from Michigan, and so I mainly have their student like graduation photographs. So they're all in their academic regalia, but the names aren't attached, and they were likely sent to the professors that taught them. And right, exactly. I'm sure the letter is around somewhere, but it's the same thing. I'm sure they took the photos for their collection, and then they all got separated. But
What a nightmare. Better
yeah.
you than me.
Yeah.
There's a common theme in the Civil War photography. Like if people would just have written on the backs of their photographs
Right.
who they were, and also really if you look at an album or something, for example, I have an album that's my great grandmother's or something, and everybody's labeled in it, you know, except for a couple people that she knows exactly who they are. So she's probably in one of those photographs, but I don't know which one she is because she didn't label herself. So you know, there's a lot of talk, especially when we go to there's a image of war seminar that the Center for Civil War Photography holds, and that's always a common joke among people who study Civil War photography that, boy, it really would have been nice if they labeled some stuff a little bit better. So
This is why, while grandma's still around, you want to take all those family photos and sit down over a dinner and go, who's this? Who's this? And we'll scribble them on the back. It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
right.
That's great. Thank you, Jessica. That's great. I'm going to mute you now. And where do I see Joseph had a question? Joseph, I'm going to unmute you, and you can fire away with your question about Confederate images.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Melissa, was there a Confederate equivalent to this, or is that all lost in the ashes of the war?
Much of it is lost, but yes, there actually was a Confederate dead letter office as well. They did not have the same sort of efforts to preserve the photographs or the letters. And that, honestly, it was in Richmond, but all the letters and if there were photographs within the letters, they weren't separated in the same manner. They were included, but most of them were destroyed. There wasn't really the sort of same effort to return mail. You could get really into some really interesting aspects of the mail during the Civil War, actually. There were some cross efforts to return mail between the federal post offices and Confederate, and even within the armies. There's some really interesting sort of, you know, partnership, if you want to call it that, but there were such things as prisoner of war mail, where there was sort of a silent agreement between the post offices that they could be stamped prisoner of war mail, and those would move through the lines. But Confederate dead letter office did exist. It was a thing, but they did not really save their mail, and none of it, I've never seen anything that's actually survived from it.
Got it. Great.
Thank you
Did that
very
help?
much. Good work.
Good deal. Thank
Very
you.
much so. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Joseph, I'm going to mute you there for a second. Annie Pike. Annie, my friend and local banjo player who plays way better than I do. Annie, you're unmuted. You got a question? You'll have to unmute yourself there, Annie, I think. Oh, I'm going to unmute you again. Let's try one more time. There you go. You're good.
Yeah. So I put my question in the chat, and I think, Melissa, you answered it. I was wondering if any of the photos, you know, they did put their last name or first name or something on the photo itself. And I think you said that possibly not. And I'm wondering if there are any women in the photos, just I don't know, just curiosity that if they were part of the Civil War or did something in the war. I know a lot of them probably pretended they were male if they were fighting, but I'm wondering if any women photographs showed up.
No, that's a great question. I have not seen any images of women. That's not to say that there might not have been some, because most of the examples you've seen tonight off of these panels
Annie, Melissa,
I
I'm
think
having
yeah,
I'm
she's
having
silent.
trouble hearing you. Melissa, we lost your audio. Melissa, we lost your audio. Maybe Melissa lost our audio too. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. I'm going to mute her and then we're going to unmute her and see if we can get her to come back here. All right. Melissa, we lost your audio. Annie, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I guess this might be the
You
last
can't
time
hear
I'm
Melissa.
invited.
Can you hear Melissa?
No, I cannot.
We lost Melissa's audio, so I'm not sure what happened there too. I'm going to see if I can get her attention. We can't hear you, Melissa. Can you hear me? Nope, we don't hear you. Let's see if we can get your audio back, because there's a few more folks with questions. I'm going to mute you and then I'm going to unmute you and see if that brings you back, but that didn't work before. Let's see what happens. Technology is with us. The ghosts of the Civil War are messing with our audio. Can I hold down the fort and you just disconnect and reconnect again? Can you do that? First off, can you hear me? Can you hear me? You can't hear me. I think we lost you. Here, I'm gonna type into the chat here. Hold on. Don't go away, everybody. Organizers and panelists. Melissa, we cannot hear you. Don't go away. We'll make this work. How about now?
I think I'm back.
You're back. We have you back. Oh, that's great.
Yay.
Good
Okay.
deal. Okay, we thought you were miming us
You
for the
lost me
past
on
30 or
the
40
email.
seconds. So
Okay.
you were chatting about women photographs. Annie Pike was asking about women photographs, and that's when we lost your audio.
Okay, that's too bad because it was a great question. So my
I thought you were going to say too bad because it was a great answer.
no, it's a great question. So right, my answer, and I'm not sure how much of it you heard, but so I'll just
Not much. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's not unlikely that there could have possibly been a photograph of a soldier with a female in it, and many of the photographs some of these photographs will have back marks from their hometowns. So it's possible that a soldier could have returned home, taken a photograph with a wife or a sister, returned to the war, and sent those photographs through the mail, and it could have ended up on the, at the dead letter office. I have never seen one with a female, but I've also seen, I think I was saying, is a lot of the examples that you see here on these panels and in my collection are mostly single portraits of men, but they weren't all. I think I have one or two that are actually a couple of soldiers together posed. And again, they would return back to their hometowns and take photographs. And there are many of these photographs on the dead letter office panels or in collections that have back marks from hometowns where there really wasn't any fighting. So they're clearly have taking photographs. So it's not unlikely that there probably could have been one or two or a few handful of them that might have had a female in them. Of course, there are many stories as well of females that did fight in the war, disguise themselves as men. It's very possible that, you know, that could have been the case, and somebody also, you know, one of them sent their picture home or something like that as well. It's not been verified or anything, but it's possible. The last thing I was saying is it's also kind of a documented or well-known fact if you study dead letter office images. I've never seen one of a USCT soldier either. They're all white males.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Mark, thank you, Annie. That was great. Mark Powell has a question. His hand's up. Mark, I'm going to unmute you, and you will have the floor. Go for it.
Carolyn and Melissa.
Hi.
Hi. Pardon me. I have about 5,500 CDVs from the war, including one dead letter office image, which I really love. Couple of questions real quick. You mentioned, and this is a tad off subject, so please forgive me, but you mentioned early on the soldier's letter. In my collection, in my letters collection, I've got quite a few letters where the men apologize for sending the letters with soldier's letter, so they have to be, the postage has to be paid by the recipient. Do you have any idea why they apologized for that? Why they were apologetic about it?
Well, I mean, my best guess is that, you know, it's kind of like making a collect phone call. You're, you know, putting the, you know, onus of expense on your recipient. And again, a lot of these soldiers, they did not have postage stamps with them or any way to get them, but they still wanted to write home. So I'm sure that if they were apologizing for it, it was just sort of a, you know, a genuine apology for making an expense for the recipient in order to receive their letter, because they would not be able to receive the letter without paying for that postage.
Right. And yet at the same time, they're asking them to send stamps. So it was kind of odd to me, because what's the difference? You're paying for the stamp or you're paying for the COD, one or the other. But anyway, the other thing is, like I said, I mentioned, I do have one dead letter office image. Is there a master index surviving of those corresponding numbers or anything about them, or do we just have the numbers on the CDVs?
No, I wish there was, but there is not. There's really, after they ended up at the most of them from the museum ended up at the this New York bookseller, and then again they just kind of go separate ways. So there's not really if there was a master list at the museum where somebody rolled in and said, I know 475, you know, and they were somehow keeping track of it or something, there's no more list. The collections went off in separate ways once they left the museum, and especially once they left that New York bookseller. Several collectors purchased up large pieces of them, and they've just continued to sort of filter out of larger collections that way.
Great, thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Where we go. So, Melissa, a couple of questions as we wrap it up. Al Ottens, you had your hand up before. There he is. You know Al. Al's going to plug his book. He's not having any questions. He's going to plug.
Okay, good.
Hello, Al. How are you?
Very good. Hey, nicely done.
Thank you.
Quick question. In terms of value of some of these photos, every once in a while you'll see a photo of a Civil War soldier who decks himself out with all sorts of weapons, you know, like a Bowie knife and a revolver and the musket. Are those sorts of photos in the dead letter photos, are those considered more valuable than another type of photo, or are the photos pretty much valued the same?
No, for sure. If you have a soldier with weapon of any sort, really, it immediately usually brings the value of that photograph up. Confederate images are more valuable. I mean, obviously that wouldn't include dead letter office images, but there are lots of little nuances when you collect Civil War photographs to what brings the value up or down. And definitely having a weapon in the photograph always usually increases the value of a soldier photograph. And I'm sure that that also is true of dead letter office images. There are several I've seen, that if I saw one that had like 3 people in it sitting around a card table, that's really unique when you start talking about dead letter office image. Again, you can see a lot of them look very similar. They're portraits or just the standing Civil War photograph. So once you start to stray from the typical, that will increase the value.
Thank you.
Good deal. Great question, Al. That's Al Otten's, author of General Rawlings, No Ordinary Man.
Yeah.
Which you can find on Amazon and everywhere else. Actually, Al was our guest just a couple of months ago, and he suggested Melissa.
You ought to see Melissa's license plate, by the way.
Oh yeah, what's it say?
It says Rawlins.
Oh, does it? Oh, no kidding.
I'm a big Rawlins fan. So yes.
Good deal. All right, Al, I'm going to mute you because we're hitting 9 o'clock. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you all for joining us. Melissa, this has just been absolutely fabulous. It's great to learn, expand our knowledge. I always learn something from these, and I learned so much tonight, and I'm very grateful for you to take the time to join us, and I know everybody else is too.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, very much so. So thanks for having me on. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
You bet. Have a great summer. Hope to talk to you soon. I'll catch up with you down the road shortly. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe and enjoy the summer.